Hello and welcome to this SCC webinar on arbitrator appointments. My name is Jake Lowther and I am Specialist Counsel here at the SCC Arbitration Institute. And in this session today, I'll be walking you through some of the key findings of our newly released report on arbitrator appointments at the SCC between the period 2020 and 2024. Now, arbitration is a dispute resolution mechanism characterized by party autonomy. One of the most valued features of arbitration is the possibility to choose your own adjudicator in the case. So this role that the SCC has in arbitrator appointments and the data that we see is crucial to understanding better how this process works. And at the SCC, we are always guided by our unofficial mantra of the right person for the right mandate. This report is driven by our commitment to transparency, to providing data where possible, and to the question of diversity and inclusion within international business and, of course, dispute resolution. And this report is a follow-up to a 2020 report which looked at arbitrator appointments in the 2015-2019 period. So some of the findings we are able to, in fact, draw from comparisons between these two periods and allows for a really meaningful decade-long comparison. So turning to the data itself, we have analysed the cases registered at the SCC between the 1st of January 2020 and the 31st of December 2024. All of the cases administered under the SCC rules, from arbitration to expedited arbitration, emergency arbitrator appointments. And this led to a pool of over 1,100 arbitrator appointments across 850 registered cases. And the survey itself is based on data from approximately 436 individual arbitrators. Now at the SCC, we are of course at all times guided by the SCC rules and to a large extent by Swedish law, which is often applicable in the cases that we administer. Now, when it comes to the appointments though, these in fact involve a minimal number of requirements or restrictions on qualifications of arbitrators. However, the most crucial thing is that an arbitrator must be impartial and independent. Now, the SCC doesn't maintain a list of arbitrators. This is a question we receive very often. Rather, the SCC has the possibility for you to register your details with the arbitrator registry that we have, which allows us to consider your profile when we are considering arbitrators to appoint in a case. And the reason for not having a closed list is because of the diversity in cases that we see here at the SCC. We have a very international caseload involving parties from over 90 different nationalities over the last 10 years. So it's crucial to be able to have an open pool of arbitrators to be able to choose from. When it comes to the rules themselves, the SCC arbitration rules provide for either a 3-member arbitral tribunal or a 1-person, a sole arbitrator tribunal. And the expedited rules always provide for a 1-arbitrator tribunal. When it comes to making the appointments, the SCC is also guided by its policy on arbitrator appointments. This provides for the board to take into account the nature of the case, the previous experience of the candidate, the seat, applicable law and language of the case, the nationality of the arbitrators, their case management skills, and other diversity-related factors as well. In the three-member tribunals, when the SCC is appointing the chairperson, we always seek a balance of expertise, qualifications, seniority, and of course the appropriate qualifications and language skills needed. And all these factors are taken into account when the SCC board meets once a month to discuss arbitrator appointments. The SCC has worked for a number of years on initiatives to try and increase the pool of arbitrators, of qualified candidates from which it can choose or can nominate an arbitrator for appointment. These include education programs and support of various other initiatives, both in the Nordic region and beyond. But let's go to the cases themselves. So of those approximately 850 cases during the relevant period, around 62% of them were registered under the SCC arbitration rules and 34% under the expedited rules, with a small proportion then of emergency arbitrations and mediations. Now, when it comes to who is doing the appointing, well, the SCC was responsible for 33% of those appointments, the parties for 62%, and then the co-arbitrators for the remaining 5%. And this ratio, when we're comparing the two different reports, has remained fairly consistent over the decade. The SCC is responsible for appointing approximately 70% of sole arbitrators and 50 to 60% of the chairpersons in three-member tribunals. But this means that the parties still have a very, very important role in the appointments of arbitrators in SCC cases. Of the approximately 1,100 appointments, around 33% were women and 67% were men. Now, if we compare this to the 2020 report, the proportion of women being appointed rose from 20% to approximately 33%. And this, in terms of a relative rise, is approximately 70%, which shows a real improvement in the numbers from a gender perspective. In the 2026 report, the period covered, the SCC can proudly say that it has achieved gender parity in its appointments, where approximately 51% of its appointments were of women arbitrators. And this is up from 30% in the previous period. And this represents a relative rise also of around 70%. Of the party appointments, here too we have seen, of course, an improvement. Approximately 20% were women arbitrators, and this was up from 14% in the previous report. And this is a rise of 12 points. Of the co-arbitrator appointments, approximately 27% were women. Now, when it comes to the role of these arbitrators, are they chairperson, are they party appointed, etc.? Women as sole arbitrators or chairperson rose from 29% to 44%, and women as co-arbitrators has risen from 14% to 32% when comparing the two different reports. So the SCC can be very proud of these results. They indicate clear progress on the question of appointing a more equal, in terms of gender, pool of arbitrators. However, clearly there is still some more work to be done, and it's a reason that the SCC continues to promote this question, continues to raise the question, because clearly we can still do more to ensure a more equal pool of arbitrator appointments. Of course, the appointments themselves only go so far to demonstrating the equality. One key question is, what are the fees being paid to the arbitrators in question? Now, in arbitrations under the SCC arbitration rules, the average fee for women arbitrators has risen from approximately 27,000 euros to over 43,000 euros, which is an increase of approximately 60%. And the average fee for men has also risen, but in this case rather somewhat less, to 37% more, from 33,000 to 45,000. The average fee gender gap has therefore narrowed from approximately 20% in the previous report to approximately 4% in this report that we are releasing in 2026. One interesting finding from the 2026 report is that in expedited arbitrations, in fact, the women arbitrators commanded a higher average fee of approximately 23,800 euros, higher than men on an average of 16,900 euros. However, it is also important to note that the fees during this period, 2020 to 2024, also cover revisions to the SCC's schedule of costs, which of course take into account prevailing market conditions and the expectations of course, the users and the arbitrators that we are appointing. When it comes to the nationality of the arbitrators, as mentioned before, the SCC boasts a very, very international caseload and of course parties from all over the world. And indeed the arbitrator pool also reflects this. Approximately 47% of the cases that the SCC saw during this period that are covered by the report were international. That is to say, at least one party has no connection to Sweden. Now, under the arbitration rules, approximately 57% of the cases were international, whereas under the expedited arbitration rules, 28% were international, which reflects the fact that in Sweden, it's very common to see an expedited arbitration. Now, when it comes to the top nationalities of arbitrators appointed in SCC cases during the period, given the preponderance of Swedish law and Stockholm-seated cases, it should come as no surprise that Swedish arbitrators are the most commonly appointed, with 50% of the total number. The following nationality most commonly seen of arbitrators was the United Kingdom, followed by Finland, Denmark, Norway, Germany, Switzerland, France, and the United States. Interestingly, Swedish arbitrators are particularly favoured internationally, with 67% of Swedish arbitrators appointed in international cases by the parties themselves. This reflects Sweden's long-standing reputation as a neutral, independent and rule of law jurisdiction. One of the key questions that the 2020 report analysed was that of repeat appointments. Are arbitrators being appointed repeatedly by the parties, by the SCC and the co-arbitrators? Of the 436 individual arbitrators that are covered by this report, around 62% were appointed only once. Approximately a quarter were appointed 2 to 4 times, 8% 5 to 9 times, and only around 4% 10 or more times. The highest number of SCC repeat appointments to any single arbitrator decreased slightly, from 9 to 8 across the two periods. Notably, the most frequently appointed arbitrator during the period was a woman, with approximately 40 appointments across that period of 2020 to 2024, and the majority of these, 33, were by the parties. Repeat appointments concentrate arbitration experience in fewer individuals, which of course then limits the pool. And so this is an ongoing area of attention for the SCC and something we always take into account when proposing arbitrators for appointment. Another question that is often asked is that of age, the age of arbitrators when they're appointed. This is of course not a statistic that the SCC generally retains, and we are very grateful to the arbitrators appointed during this period who provided their dates of birth where we did not have this information in their CVs. According to the data we gathered, the average age of appointed arbitrators was approximately 53 during the period, the median age approximately 51. Arbitrators were most commonly appointed between the age of 45 and 61, and for men, the median age was 55 and women 47. This indicates that women are receiving appointments first at a younger age. Now, the arbitrators appointed by the SCC were the youngest, at approximately 47 in the median and 49 on average. When it comes to the ages of the party-appointed arbitrators, they were somewhat older, the median being 55 and the average approximately 57, which suggests a preference for appointing more senior or familiar practitioners as arbitrator. And when it comes to the co-arbitrator appointments, these skewed slightly older still, with an average of 59, and this also suggests that the co-arbitrators would also prefer a more senior practitioner as perhaps the chairperson. The youngest arbitrator appointed during the period was by the SCC, a man at 31 years of age, whereas the oldest was 81, a man appointed by the parties. So, what are some of the key findings and conclusions from this 2026 report? Firstly, and most importantly, it's that progress has definitely been made, and substantially as well. Women's share of all appointments in SCC cases has risen from approximately 20% to approximately 33% across the two periods. And as mentioned, the SCC is proud to have reached gender parity in its appointments during this period. However, there is still work to be done. The SCC, which is responsible for only 33% of appointments, can only do so much. There remains still work to be done by the parties, by the co-arbitrators, who still appoint women at a lower rate, at only approximately 26%. This is why it's important to maintain awareness, dialogue, and transparency to ensure that we are contributing to a more diverse and inclusive arbitrator pool. As part of the SCC's commitment going forward, we will continue to monitor and report on arbitrator appointments as part of this commitment to diversity, inclusion, and transparency. With this report, this webinar, we have confidence in progress being made and in keeping diversity at the top of the agenda, and that this benefits the international arbitration community and ultimately the users of international arbitration. However, the closing message when it comes to SCC arbitrator appointments is still the key of the right person for the right mandate, every case. How can you be appointed as an SCC arbitrator? As mentioned, there is no official list, closed list. The SCC parties and co-arbitrators are free to appoint any individual who is impartial, independent, and possesses the relevant qualifications. In practice, most arbitrators are experienced lawyers, academics, judges, and other dispute resolution professionals. We at the SCC prioritize experience, skill, and expertise across different industries, jurisdictions, and sectors. And how can you increase your chances of appointment? Please consider registering your details in the SCC's arbitrator registry. This is open to any arbitrator to do and ensures that we have your details on file and can consider that in upcoming cases. Consider also attending and completing the educational initiatives that the SCC, together with the Swedish Arbitration Association, organise. We have these both in Swedish and in English. And in the English example, it's specifically designed for experienced arbitrators with at least 10 years of experience and a bar admission outside of Sweden. Thank you for joining us today at this webinar, a deep dive into arbitrator appointments at the SCC from 2020 to 2024. If you're interested in learning more, please visit our website, where you'll find much more information, statistics, and of course, more information on how to be appointed as an arbitrator at the SCC. And please stay tuned for more updates, follow us on LinkedIn, and we hope to see you again soon.